Hello, and welcome to the channel. Today, we're going to be finishing the Chieftain Mk10 that we've been working on for the last little while. To finish it up, we're going to be doing some weathering, but we're not going to be using any heavy weathering. We're just going to be using some light pigments and some nice washes, just to get it looking nice and grimed up and dirtied up. So, to start out with, we're going to be using this nice AK wash. Now, this wash is very easy to use. It's an enamel wash, so you just wipe it on, wiping it all over the tank, and then once it's dry, you'll come back and thin it down with some thinners. Now, to start out with, this wash, really easy to use. I really like using these because they can get a very heavily weathered look, or even a very toned down weathered look, very quickly without a ton of effort. Now, I wanted to do this for this tank because when these tanks were deployed in Berlin, they really didn't see too much heavy use or heavy combat, and because they were in a city, they really wouldn't have been dirtied up or muddied up like you see many tanks do. So I really wanted to just make them look dirty and grimy without making them look too muddy or like they've been through too much, because they would have been on roads and on streets that wouldn't have gotten them too dirty in the typical sense that an off-road vehicle or a military vehicle gets dirtied up with. But to do that, we're just of course taking that wash, and now that it's dried up a bit, we're just thinning it down using some thinner to blend it all together and tone down and tone up the spots that would gather everything, just making sure everything is all good. And you can see just doing this on the side here. Now, this process is really nice, it's really satisfying, but it can be a little nerve-wracking at times because you put a little bit too much on, you don't know how it's going to turn out. But if you just keep going at it using thinner to just thin everything down, work everything in, it turns out really nice. As you can see here, just getting it done using different weathering brushes and getting everything put in very nice and good. Really making this process nice and pretty easy to do. Using those brushes and using different ones to get kind of different textures, as well as you can see here, making sure that it doesn't really look like it was brushed on, and more making it look like it's just gathered grime and dust over time. Really making it look like it's properly weathered and properly good. Then of course we're going to do the exact same thing with the turret. Really just covering the whole kit with it, covering all of the areas, making sure to get in all the deep little difficult areas to get to, and just kind of covering it. And then once it kind of dries up a bit, we'll of course come back and do the exact same thing. Like I say, this weathering method is really easy to do, and it really elevates any kit and any model to just another level because it doesn't just look all clean. Now we're going to come back with a different color of weathering compound or weathering wash, and this is a much darker, much more of an oily looking one, and this will really help to kind of just convey and make things look dirty. Even adding here on this nice big fuel or oil drum on the back, making it look like it may have had some kind of leak or some kind of little spillage. Same with on the sides here and on the little areas around things where grease fittings or other things would really have kind of come out. And same with the undercarriage, just coating it very liberally and very heavily in all of these dark washes and dark oily looking things that really just make things look darker and make it look like it's not just perfectly clean. Then, of course, same thing with the other wash. Once it's all dry, coming back and just kind of cleaning it up, blending it into the rest of the tank, making everything look good. Doing the same on all of those wheels, of course, just making sure everything goes in all nice and gets put in all right. Now, after that, we're going to do the limited amount of pigments we're going to do on this kit. So, putting some pigment fixer on first, and then just tapping some nice pigments. I used a mix of gray, sand, and brown pigments, really to just make a generic dusty, kind of dirty look. Like I say, I really don't want this tank to look like it's been super heavily in combat or super heavily in dark or muddy environments, just that it's a little weathered after being used in a city or in somewhat of a rundown combat zone for a while. So that's really what I'm doing here, just on the sides where dust would be kicked up, just kind of throwing on some of the pigments, getting everything nice and good. And now we're going to move on to the tracks and getting all of them nice and weathered up. So I'm of course just going to be covering the whole track with some pigment fixer here, just getting everything good and covered, making sure to get in all of the little nooks and crannies and all of the little detailed areas, just to make sure that it will be really covered and get plenty of pigment and everything on it. And then after that, we're of course just going to go over like we did with the rest, just kind of tapping and dusting the whole thing with the pigments. Like I say, really not wanting to get any heavy amount of pigments or anything too heavy on this kit, as that's not the weathering look that I'm going for. If you want to see a much more muddy look or a much more muddied weathering style, you can go and check out my Object 279 build and that series, where I did a much more heavily muddied and heavily weathered build. So now that all of the pigments and all that are on in a way that I like, we are going to be attaching the cables that we made in the last episode and kind of showing how I made all those cables. So if you want to see those cables, go and check out those videos. So just using some little bits of super glue right in the connection points, gluing them on, and then using some tweezers just to really position it and get it right where I want it to. That's another really nice thing with using custom cables like this, and not just plastic ones, is you can really bend them to however you want them to look. And so for this build, I did that, and I bent it so one of the cables looks like it's just hanging down a little bit. Adds a little bit more dynamic and interest to the build, and so just to make sure that it's not sticking out, I'm going to glue it on just to the side, just so it looks nice and good, as you saw there. Now we're going to be doing the antennas. I like to do the melted sprue method with my antennas. I think they come out really nice. So all you just do is take a lighter or a candle or something. You don't need to use as crazy of a lighter as I do, but you just melt those sprues, get them nice and good, and then just stretch them out. After a little while and a little bit of practice, you can get into bending them a little bit and making them look like they've got a little bit of airflow or a little bit of dynamic to them, as you can see on the final build. But it's a really simple method, just taking some black sprue or some leftover black plastic, melting it, and then stretching it out. Then of course you're just going to cut them off at the ends, and then cut them in the middle, and you have some really nice antennas that you can use for your builds. They really add a lot to the builds, and they're better than pretty much any antenna that will come with a kit. Some kits do come with nice little wire antennas, and they're pretty good, but sometimes they're not great. So we're going to now install them on the kit. And to do that, I'm just going to, of course, cut off the top bit, just kind of flattening it out, and then we're going to drill a nice little hole just so the antenna can fit in nicely. And of course, I'm just going to poke a little hole at the front there just to kind of help the drill bit go in, and then I'll take one of the nice little small drill bits I've got and drill a nice little hole in the top of this antenna mount just to make it look nice and good and give us a nice little fit area to fit up that antenna. This just makes it a little bit easier to fit them in for these smaller little antennas. Then once we have that nice and drilled out, just clean up a little bit, and we'll come back with some super glue, just putting it in, and then we'll put the antenna itself in. Now I like to just kind of put the antenna in and then hold it there for a little bit, just kind of making sure and just pushing it around a little bit so it's kind of bent or moving in the way that I want. And that really helps to give a motion look to these antennas. Now for this one, I decided not to drill it because you can kind of do it two ways. If the base of your antenna is a little bit bigger, which I left the base on this one a little bit bigger, sometimes you can just super glue them on and they'll work perfectly well. And so that will be the final bits that we're going to add on to this little kit, just to make them nice and good and make it look a little nice. So after that, I'm just going to go back with a few more weathering pigments and weathering washes and everything, just to kind of touch up some of the areas that I may not have liked as much or I may have had some issues with. Just kind of throwing them in, doing all the same methods we did earlier in the episode and earlier in the video, just throwing it on, but doing them a little more targeted in the areas that may have been missed or may not look completely how I want them, or that don't have enough grime or weathering for where they should be or how I want the kit itself to look. Now of course this is very simple, doing the same thing done all before, but like I say, just going over and being much more pointed with it and much more specific with where we're going. Like I say here on this fuel drum, because it's a very messy and oily fuel drum that looks like it's been leaking a bit. Really want to add some more weathering to it and really make it look like it's messy and dirty. And it also helps with any imperfections or anything on the paint job itself. So with that, that will be the end of this episode and the end of this build series, which I've really enjoyed, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too, because I think this thing came out really nice. This paint job is really unique, and nothing else is really like it out there. So, if you like this build, like the video, if you have any comments or questions about this build, go ahead and put them in the comments below. And if you want to see any of the other videos or upcoming builds, because I've got some really cool ones coming up, remember to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. So, for now that's all. Have a good one, and enjoy the final photos.